And we are live. Okay, this time we are doing part two of Art and Multitude by Antonio Negri. But our friend Jeff McLaren here, his camera is not working for some reason.
Yeah, sorry about that. But if you guys can hear me, I think we can proceed until I figure this out at some point later.
All right, well, we don't, we can hear everything we need to hear.
Okay.
So, all right, let's get started then.
Okay, so last time we looked briefly at his notion of philosophy of art, and it's sort of a summary of what happens in everybody's life in the political world as well as in the art world. And he claims off the start that it's the struggle that's most important in art as it is in politics. But he's going to talk about art, but he's also it's an analogy to politics and how to change the world. So with when you're changing the world through art, you have to overcome struggle, or you have struggle to overcome. And he feels that one of the biggest struggles that we've had in recent times is the death of transcendent truth. And we've found two ways to deal with that. One is what he calls the modern way, in which we are searching for this truth, which doesn't exist. And so we continue to search forever.
Okay, so yeah, we think there is a truth out there and we have to find it.
Yes. We sort of know implicitly that there's no truth, but we're on this.
We're still all looking for it anyway.
Yes, exactly. And then there's the postmodern answer, which he says is where you recognize that there is no truth, but you create it, you add it, you put it into your art or into the world if you're struggling to change the world.
Right.
And in the process of doing this, it starts off with an emotion, which he calls the sublime. The sublime is that moment when your prejudices, where one or two or several of your prejudices, your sensibilities, or your thought categories dissolves, and you envision a world that without that, and it's bigger, it's better, you see it as bigger and better, and you want to change the world that way. At that moment, you are in opposition to the entire world. And he's very clear about this, you are incredibly arrogant to think that you're right and the rest of the world is wrong. But you must accept that arrogance. And if you are successful later on, you will be called a trailblazer or a hero or something like that. But at that moment, it's you are right and the rest of the world is wrong. So then you come back into the world and you present your vision. You do what you need to do, and the world will transform you as well. So it goes back and forth in a spiral that changes or creates new art, changes the world or creates new art. So those are the first two sections of this, and today we're going to cover the next two. So we'll be done with this book today.
Oh, good.
So his question today is on beauty and what exactly is beauty. So, of course, he's talking about art, but what he's also talking about is good politics behind the scenes. But he starts off by saying, this is kind of the wrong first question to ask. You eventually have to ask it, but it's if you start off by starting with that with no background or no premise, you'll be lost in a modern tangle. The idea that there is beauty out there in the world or in a piece of art is a very modern idea. And so that's in fact how the world looks at it. So we say the Mona Lisa is beautiful, and we can give these reasons why it's beautiful.
Right.
And he says this is in fact a modern trap. And if you do that, you're not going to actually change anything. You're just going to adopt the same categories and sensibilities that exist now. But if you want to change something, you're going to have to adopt new ones. You're going to have to insert your own new categories or eliminate those other ones. So he goes through a series of a list of things that past philosophers have thought was beautiful, and I think most people would agree are in fact somewhere close to beautiful. So if you've ever heard the expression that a sculptor wasn't really sculpting anything, but just removing the excess material and the sculpture was always there, that's a very modern notion, and he says, no, that's not how it works. So this comes from sort of Plato and his notion of the eternal forms caught in there. He goes on to say, for Aristotle, for example, beauty was harmony and symmetry. for Thomas Aquinas,
Mm.
it was that which pleases upon being seen. That's Thomas Aquinas. For Immanuel Kant, he claimed that whatever pleases immediately, apart from all interest, that's beautiful. And the utilitarians, whatever is useful for some purpose or other. And as examples, Freud and Darwin would say that whatever is useful for getting sex and procreation is beautiful.
Useful. So even if it's lies to get
Yes,
sex,
yes.
that's
So,
beautiful.
yeah. So you can see how, well, you're way ahead in the sense that you're recognizing that maybe that's not entirely beautiful, but that's if you were to follow the utilitarian model.
Right.
So, as a modern person, you're looking for these things, these sort of outer worldly things that then you can apply to the work itself. And by imposing these rules and these constraints, you're systematically closing off all the avenues of artistic labor that are beyond one's imagination. And it's where it's beyond the imagination. That's where the sublime first gave you that vision, right? So it's already breaking free from your imagination. If you're going to limit art or even politics to what exists already, you're being
Mm.
anti-democratic. You're in fact closing off any possibility of future improvements or future movements.
So by calling something beautiful, you're doing that?
Yes, if and you're in the modern sense, and if you say you can define it. So this is why it's beautiful,
Okay, right,
because
gotcha.
it's symmetrical, because it's pleasing upon being seen, because it's useful for something or other. These are, if you claim these are the definitions of beauty, if you start off with that kind of a definition, that it's out there and it needs to be applied and seen in the art or sensed in the art, um, you're missing the point.
Damn. I
You're
think.
in fact a modern, and you're going to be stuck in it.
Okay, okay. Damn. I think I'm guilty of some of that.
Don't worry, we all are in a sense, because that's what we're taught. This is the world we live in. So we have art appreciation classes that tell us how to do this. We have a whole series of all this kind of stuff. And what he's saying is that's really good for the past. And at some point in the past, that was great. It was authentic, new, something new, but not anymore.
So the idea that there was a definable beauty, it was useful at a point to the past, but we're past that, is what he's saying.
Yes, precisely.
So
So,
that's so very Marxist. Okay.
oh, he is a very Marxist. Oh, yeah. So
Yes.
this is Marxism applied to art in a sense.
Yeah.
So now that we see that what is beauty is the wrong question if you're looking for one of those definitions. But now if you grasp that notion, you can avoid the trap when the question comes up. So now he wants us to consider what is beautiful. And he does have a definition, but it's sort of a new one, which will, of course, be out of date at some point in the future. But for him, for today, it's the exceedance of being. That's his term. Beauty comes from an exceedance of being. Now,
Too much being.
uh, okay, so he misspelled, or at least the translator misspelled exceedance. So when I looked it up online, that's misspelled, but it's the way it's spelled there. So I think he may have just created a new word that sounds very similar in Italian, in the original language that he was writing, and the translator did the same thing into English.
So is it like going beyond being?
It's well, okay, okay, in a sense. So an exceedance of being, in relation to life, produces in people a powerful charge of emotion that tears us apart, as if we wanted to both contemplate and act. So when you see something that's beautiful in the world today, no, there's no definition. Okay, that's symmetrical. That's not. That's pleasing upon, that kind of stuff. It wants you to both. You have a sense that you want to go and get it, possess it, study it, or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and just contemplate it. So you're torn between wanting to act and wanting to just enjoy.
Interesting.
Yes.
Wanting to act and wanting to enjoy.
Yes.
It's like voyeurs versus, I don't know, a rapist or something.
Well, in the sense that a voyeur is just contemplating, not acting, and the rapist is acting and not contemplating, they're opposites. But you want to combine both of them. So the
Maybe
emotion.
not. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, in that example, it's not good. But the emotion is that you want to both act and contemplate. You want to eat and have your cake at the same time. This is, and it's impossible technically, but
Mhm.
it's that emotion that you feel at that moment. So exceedance of being draws us to extremes of positivity or negativity in moral judgments. And it's always in the midst of our poverty of experience. So it's a very, it has it. You feel both of them, but you eventually have to choose one of them. And it
Right.
has this emotionally, and it's polarizing. It has a polarizing effect on a person.
So, okay, so a good example might be, um, old collectible action figures or baseball cards that people
Okay.
put in their case instead of
Yes.
like an action figure that you never open the package on.
Yes. In that sense, you're feeling the emotion. Yes, because I'm sure you're wanting to open it up and play with it, but you don't. In that case, you've chosen
To just admire it
to
as an
admire it.
object.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're feeling like you want to tear it open and you do tear it open, you can also be feeling it, but you may have chosen the other way. Um, one may last longer. The contemplation often lasts longer.
Right. So you by doing that and playing with it, you lose the ability to
Well,
contemplate it.
no, you don't lose it. It's like the initial feeling is that you're torn between these two and you have to choose. You can't act and contemplate at the same time because contemplating is like passive almost. It's happening without action.
Right. Okay. You can't be both passive and active at the same time. You
Yes,
got to be
but you
one or the other.
want to be. You recognize you're losing something when you're moving in one direction or another.
Okay.
Okay? So, exceedance of being holds within it the notion of power over something. So beauty comes from beings or an object's power over that subject. So in that case of the Lego or the action figure, it has a certain power over you, right? You're acting in a certain way towards it. I'm going to put it in its case and never touch it. That kind of stuff. That's the sense that there's a power. Beauty has power over others. So if you're looking at somebody who you're in love with and who's like the most beautiful woman in the world for you, she has a certain power over you, and beauty has that on you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of the emotion. It has to be arresting in the observer who disregards everything else, and it yeah, it's essentially got a huge power over you because you want to do something and you also want to contemplate it at the same time.
Yeah,
So, but you can't. You have to eventually choose. So, exceedance is also very nearly synonymous with the term value in the sense that both are determined by the accumulated totality of liberated human labor.
okay.
So here we're getting into the very Marxist notion.
Yes.
Liberated human labor for him is another term. So it creates value. Whenever you labor, you create value. And now, if you happen to be alienated, like you're on an assembly line, you create very little personal value. But what he wants to say is that the liberated human labor is a work of joy. It's joyful, and it may be hard, it may be taxing, it may be dangerous, it may be a whole set of other negative qualities. But if you're doing it joyfully, you've got that liberated human labor. Um,
It has to be joyfully.
yes, okay, and like again, joyfully can also be mixed in with painful, hard struggle and all that stuff. But when it's joyful, the labor is liberated.
Right.
Right? So when a mother, for example, is joyfully taking care of her child, she's not getting paid. In a sense, she's being exploited. The child is essentially taking advantage of her, but she does it out of joy. That's a type of liberated human labor.
Right.
So if you are actually doing something for the money, that's not liberated human labor.
No.
If you're willing to do it for free, and you would do it for free in any case, there's a joy in that. But not if you have also to do it out of necessity. I mean, some necessity maybe, but if it's necessary, it's more clear that it's joyful if you don't have to do it, you're not getting paid for it, and you still do it anyway.
So people who, for example, come home after a long day's work and paint or write poetry, they're doing, to stay sane, as they might say, that is liberated labor or liberated, yeah,
Yes.
liberated labor.
It has a very good chance of being that. I mean, if they got a secret ambition to get published and to make become a world famous poet or become a poet
They're doing it
laureate,
for themselves because they love it.
yes,
It
in a
helps
sense,
keep, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that would
Because
be
it's
probably
probably
better.
because it's the only thing it's probably the only thing they do that makes them feel liberated because they're free to do it and they're choosing to do it,
Yes,
as opposed to being alienated from whatever their boss is making them produce.
precisely. Yes. So the best of the accumulated liberated labor of all people is indicative of the values or exceedances of that particular society. So if you've noticed that some societies or some periods in time have similar art, it's a reflection of that. Those values, the similar experience, the similar exceedance of life, of labor, and of the liberated labor of the people at that time and place. So, and remember, doesn't mean it's easy. Joyful doesn't mean it's easy. It's always a struggle because for him, the struggle is incredibly important. The struggle creates meaning in people's lives, and when the struggle is a joy rather than a burden,
Mm.
there's the possibility of liberated labor.
So okay, so struggle in terms of if you maybe you are still working some terrible job, but you come home and maybe you've got some art project that's very difficult and time consuming and takes a lot of energy and therefore meaning there's struggle in it itself,
Yes.
but so that makes it liberated.
Yes. So it can't be too easy, right? If it's too easy, it's not labor in the sense. It's maybe it's exercise, you might say, or it's practice, but it's not the labor. The labor itself it's like a test. It's the hard struggle, but it's done joyfully. And you may train for it. You may work hard for it, but the working hard in it is not in itself the exceedance of the exceedance of being there. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So now we can ask, what is beauty? Without falling into the limits of the modern judgmental trap. And for him, exactly, beauty is the exceedance of being. And the exceedance of being is an open concept. It's not bound by established rules and practices. It is possible to find an exceedance of being in any human activity. It doesn't have to be art, and it can in fact be in politics as well. As such, human activity that moves you emotionally and holds you physically and which reveals your values is beautiful. And this is what he believes is the postmodern definition of beauty. Okay? And notice that it's different from the modern definitions in that the beauty is not in the work of art itself. Rather, it's in what is popular.
Struggle.
It's in the struggle, yes. So the Mona Lisa itself is not the work of art. It was the struggle that went into producing it. What we see in the Mona Lisa is the leftover result of the liberated human labor. So Leonardo da Vinci, who painted that, we can see his work in the Mona Lisa. And he claims that the beauty in the Mona Lisa comes from the work that he put into it, not the leftover painting that we might see in the Louvre.
Right. So this kind of throws a wrench in the whole kind of art dealer world where art is a lot valued based on who the artist is or how rare it is or how old it is rather than the struggle of the individual or the story of the individual.
The story is important. That's all we have really access to, as well as the leftover art. So for him, part of what we're missing out with all this art history and stuff like that is the recognition that the artwork itself is only the leftover remains of the work. The work is long gone, but it's tied to the original work in a way that a copy can never have.
So it's a historical bit of evidence of the work that was done.
Precisely, yes. So for him, a copy of the Mona Lisa, no matter how close, is not the same, not as valuable as the original. And the original itself is far less valuable than the actual effort that Leonardo da Vinci would have put in, or did put in, to make it.
Interesting. So it's like the ripple or shadow of the actual.
Yes, and if you're looking at it online, you're even further divorcing yourself from the actual work. Does that make sense? So there's other philosophers out there who would say that you want to enjoy the work and you can do it on a computer screen just as well as you can in the Louvre, and maybe even better because you can zoom in and that kind of stuff. He's saying only if you're modern. And if you're modern, you're lost because you've missed the whole point of it.
So only if you're lost.
Yes, only if you're lost. And the reason that you're lost in that sense is because you are stuck within the categories that the world has already given you. You can't see beyond them to what actually created any art. Does that make sense?
Hold on, say that again.
So if you're lost, you're stuck in the postmodern world.
The modern world.
The modern world, pardon me. You are missing out on what actually caused beauty or where the beauty came from. You're only stuck with the leftovers.
Right.
And
okay.
So far as you're doing that, you're in a poverty of existence.
Interesting. Okay, gotcha. So the leftovers might be a good term because then it's not only a cold, many-day-old version of the original meal that was cooked, but it's also forgetting all the effort that went into cooking that meal.
That's a very good analogy. Yes, like if you see, say at Thanksgiving, you see your mother, your grandmother helping to cook or cooking all this stuff, you're seeing the work and the love that's going into it.
It means more.
And it means more for that way. You come late and you're getting the leftovers. You're missing. You're still enjoying the leftovers, but it's a far cry from the full experience.
Right. Yes, and I think that's something people could probably viscerally understand as well. That experience.
Yes, and he refers to this as it's the joy of action. This joy of action, it's like the desire of a child. It's completely innocent when they're working. When a child's at play, this is like a term that comes almost from Nietzsche. The seriousness of a child at play. When a young child is at play, there's joy, and it's serious. I mean, if you've ever seen kids playing hide and go seek and when they play with their action figures and stuff, they are so absorbed and all dedicated and connected to that. That's something that we sort of lose as adults as we have to multitask and stuff like that. Yeah. So the postmodern way is liberated labor as the human source of all art. And insofar as humanity is present in every age, good art is always and everywhere the expression of liberated labor. The modern one, on the other hand, is stuck looking at things that they try and find some reason why it's beautiful, it's symmetrical, or it's pleasing, or something like that.
Yeah, they try to break it down into its component parts or something.
Yes.
To define it.
Right. So, in that sense, good art must therefore always be revolutionary. In many ways, but at least in a political sense. So again, this doesn't mean that artists have to belong to a political party, but rather artists must be in a unique relationship to being, to life, and to ethics. So if you recall, he's talking about when you have that sublime moment, you are in opposition to the world. You have created, in a sense, a new ethic. And a freedom from the usual constraints of the mind is a liberty to act on those, and the liberty to act on that is, in a sense, the exceedance of being.
So an essential part of it is breaking free of the normal patterns of mind and behavior.
Yes, because all of those that we live up or we grow up in the world came to us from the world outside us. They are the world. If you're
Yeah.
just reproducing Mannerist paintings or Impressionist paintings or academic paintings, um, you're doing
Wait.
nothing new. You're just copying, perhaps with different subject matter, what came from the past. You're not. You're searching for that perfect um, impressionist painting that you know you can make with because you have more information than all these other impressionist painters that came before you. No, that's a modern trap. The
Gotcha.
modernist period of time was unique to that time and place. The struggle that they were going through was expressed in that, but it was their struggle, not yours.
Right. Right.
Your
So you
struggle is
can't reproduce that.
right. I mean, in the modern sense you can,
You
but he's
can't.
saying that's not really art.
It's
It's
not
not.
okay.
You're just copying. You're a copyist. A postmodern artist brings something new.
Now, okay. Well, how does that jive with I don't know if this is a modern idea or not, but that really there is no such thing as kind of creativity or there's nothing new under the sun because everything is really just built on the shoulders of what came before. It's just kind of a remix. All you're really doing is remixing old things that are already there.
Yes. So yes. So there's two ways of remixing. You can remix old things that are there with nothing new added, which is the modern way. That's when you're stuck in the same categories, you're stuck in the same sensibilities or the same prejudices, and you're just changing the subject matter. And you may get a different, really good, or really from a modern perspective, really nice new modern impressionist painting, but it's not impressionist. You're out of time, you're out of sync, you're in the wrong time and place. Because there will always be new experiences and new struggles that people go through, there is always the potential for new art. If you can't imagine that, that's because you're modern. You're stuck in the categories of the old. But remember that when the new comes in, it's going to be rejected at first. It's going to be thought of as crazy or as weird. It's that artist in his arrogance, thinking that he is better than everybody who's ever come before him, producing something new. That's what moves the world forward.
The arrogance.
Yes, the arrogance is where it starts.
Gotta have arrogance.
Pardon?
Gotta have the arrogance.
Absolutely, yes. So now, the postmodern person still lives in this world. He lives in, or he or she would live in this real world. And okay, another concept that has to be done before that. This real world, there is always some real subsumption. For Antonio Negri, the term real subsumption refers to domination such that all the categories of life are reduced to one single form. In the Middle Ages, it was probably Christianity. Today, it is to the capitalist reproduction of society. In other words, the market. Today, the market is bigger and more pervasive than it has ever been in the history of the world. Everything is on the market. Like, there's always been markets, but they've been in a particular place and they've been a particular part of society. They've never been the entirety of society. So
Right.
there's a market
Yeah.
for everything. So he sees this as the real subsumption of capital. Okay? So the new ethic, which the sublime experience leads to be must be revolutionary. It must be against the real subsumption of the day. If it's not, then you are supporting the subsumption of the day. And if you're
Okay, so
supporting,
so anything that's not directly against the system is in fact part of the system.
yes, because the system creates the struggle, or is one of the source of creating a struggle for the people, right? If we need to survive, we need to deal with the market. That's very different from a person who maybe lived in a subsistence farm and had to survive against the elements or against nature, or a soldier in a state of war, or somebody fighting against the so-called truths of religion that he felt may not have been correct. Whatever the struggle was, today the struggle is in the market. If you want to succeed today, you got to struggle in the market. And that is the subsumption of capital, the real subsumption of capital, which any new ethic needs to go against that, because that's where the struggle is for people today, the real world struggle. Everybody needs an income to survive in the world today.
Yeah.
It was not always true. I mean, if you lived on a subsistence farm, you did not need an income because they didn't need money. They had the actual goods that they needed. They were producing them themselves in a sense. That was the struggle, very different. So the art produced today would be real if the ethic is revolutionary.
Ah.
Right? So if the art is not, then it's merely advertising or it's propaganda, and it's not revolutionary.
So in, let's say, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, under feudalism, then so any art, art wasn't art unless it was challenging the feudalist hierarchy.
The real subsumption of the time, which perhaps was Catholicism. So I suspect,
or Catholicism, yeah.
So I suspect that most Protestants, well, I guess that came a little later, but perhaps I should say most heretics who survived for a few generations were probably creating real art at that time, because they were against the real subsumption of the time.
Right.
It became feudalism. The market. Well, okay, so during the Renaissance, the market was replacing feudalism. So the market produced new forms of art. And so you had the mannerism, you had the academy, these movements that were created as a result of that. But then they became the real subsumption. And so if you're making new art in that style today, you are essentially supporting the status quo.
Mm.
And so your sublime experience will lead you in some way to challenge the real subsumption of the world, and that means the market. So did I make a real subsumption clear? It's like there's
I'm not sure.
Okay, let's try another example. There's a stereotypical evolutionary biology theory that claims that men look for women with whom they can have sex, and women look for men that can provide material support for the family. This theory is an example of real subsumption in academic biology, because it essentially says that women exist for men's consumption and men exist to provide women opportunities for consumption, thus further legitimizing many forms of domination, including the dominance of market valuation, which encourages consumption.
Yeah.
So see how theories of academic biology are linked to the market. Now, what somebody with a broader range of historical understanding would say is that evolutionary biology theory may make sense to people who live in a market-dominated society, but it wouldn't make sense in pretty much any other society.
Right. In a tribal or a slave society or
exactly.
Whatever.
There's no reason to believe that. It would be like ludicrous within different societies with different real subsumptions.
Yeah.
So
if you're in a hunter-gatherer society, then actually, yeah. Well, I mean, they in hunter-gatherer societies, they lived in like communal spaces where you didn't really matter who your dad was. What your mother, it was matrilineal, so you didn't care how much your mate was able to pick berries or kill boars, because it was really up to the tribe to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. So he makes a notice or a differentiation. Formal subsumption is the process of creating market value legitimation in a field. Real subsumption, which is what we were talking about earlier, is the victory of formal subsumption in all relevant fields of life. So in the past, religion dominated all fields of life. Today, it's the market. That shift, as it moved into more and more areas of human life, was the formal subsumption of the market, and today we have it in the the real subsumption, it's beaten everything else.
Right. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we can get back to, we have to live in the real world. So the real world we happen to be in is one in
Damn.
which, you okay?
No, I'm kidding. Never mind.
Okay, so in the real world today, we have to deal with the fact that we live in a world that's dominated by the market. And in order to do that, or I guess I shouldn't say in order to do that, people who recognize that and want to be revolutionary often develop, well, their ethic that their struggle in domination against the domination of the market comes in three possible paths, two of which are dead ends. So this is very tricky. And one of them has the possibility of changing the world. So he describes these paths as the utopian path, the terrorist path, and the constituent path. So if you have this vision and you have this new ethic and you follow the utopian path, it has the characteristics of perfection and transcendence. The image grasped in the sublime experience was never really grounded in the world that actually is. And this path tends to lead to abandonment or impotence. So I believe that he's talking about classical Marxists here.
Oh, classical Marxists. Well,
Yeah.
Marx criticized utopian socialists.
Yes, but he's not talking utopian socialist, he's a utopian path, which is where you adhere to the characteristics of a particular system to perfection, to transcendence. So if you have people still talking about the proletariat revolution today, nobody talks about the proletariat revolution because there's no proletariat class. I mean, the working class, if we can still use that term, owns stock in the means of production.
Right?
Well,
some of them.
Yeah, a lot of them do. I mean, if you happen to have a union job, probably you've got enough to invest in that kind of stuff, right? So there's new classes, there's new struggles there. It just doesn't fit anymore. And to try and make the world fit into 18th or 19th century theory is utopian. And it ends in abandonment. People will not follow it. Or
when did he say this? When did he write this?
So these were a series of letters that he wrote over a 20-year period. So it would have been probably the 90s.
Okay. Negri.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're stuck in somebody else's theory that was produced, 200 years ago, you're in a bit of trouble. Unless it's supporting the status quo. So Marx was certainly not supporting the status quo. But Marxists today are not doing are lost in the sense they have no power. They're impotent.
They are today. That's for sure.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that it's because their theories are outdated. I think a lot of people would argue that they still actually are valid.
Yes, but then in such a way that they need to adapt and change them. But that would not be true to the original Marxism.
Right. Yes.
That's being true to the original is the utopian path, and it's bound to fail. Gotcha. So you may read Marx for the first time, and suddenly the blinkers come off, and you can see the world differently. You find it a sublime experience in reading Marx. But if you're so committed to Marx that you're unwilling to change the language and adapt it to the real world today, you've gone along the utopian path, and you're going to eventually give it up, or you won't do anything because you'll be impotent.
Okay, gotcha. I think, that makes a little more sense.
Okay, so the second path that he says, the second dead end, he calls a terrorist path. And it has characteristics of reaction and destruction. The image that's grasped in the sublime experience, it just can't tolerate the real world. And it has to, in a sense, destroy it. And we do have to destroy the world before we can rebuild it up, but not the way that the terrorist would do it. So I think he's talking here about the Red Brigades in Italy. So these guys were a terrorist group, a Marxist terrorist group that would go around, bombing cars and stuff like that. And, it doesn't really get anything done because people don't react well to that, especially if it's their car. So The terrorists are violent path. The violent in the sense of like blowing stuff up is a dead end for him as well. The only one that actually has any potential from his perspective is what he calls the constituent path. And in this one, the factitious world, that is the facts of the world, you keep the facts of the world, but simultaneously go beyond the abstracted world that we've created. Okay, it's grounded in what it is, but it's always moving beyond to the new and back again. So this is where that spiral of the spiral of cause and effect and back and forth goes. So you put out something, some of it works, some of it doesn't. So you drop the stuff that doesn't work and you adapt the stuff that works to make it better. That kind of stuff. It's you're in dialogue with the world around you. Okay, so. And what this involves for him is storytelling. It builds narratives that link the world that is to the world that's envisioned. But it's not so utopian that you can't make the connection, and it's not so terroristic that it drives people away. It means linking the facts of the world with the shared history, the common struggle, creating a meaning of a singular vision of the sublime, and transforming and recreating both over and over again. So no revolution is ever done.
Right.
And there's no end point, in a sense, to a revolution.
Permanent revolution. Very, very Trotskyist.
Very Trotskyist in that sense, yes. It's an ongoing thing that reacts to the world around you and continues to push glimpses of the world that's coming and the sublime vision of the particular artist or revolutionary commander.
Mm-hmm.
So every movement is the telling of a story, and the future that we create is the story of our liberation if you choose the constituent path. If you don't choose the constituent path, the stories won't be your liberation because they'll either die in impotence or in solitude.
Right.
So the story must be constructed at every step of the way without end.
So like like he talked about at the very beginning of his book, that you have to create your own meaning as you go, never never finalize it, never stop.
Exactly. Yes. Precisely.
Comes around.
It does.
Okay, so that's the constituent
Mm-hmm.
form of revolution.
Yes. Now, okay, so there are some new and unique tools that the world, in the world today, that never existed before, and these tools, when used properly, will be the source of new art as well as new political movements. So,
Internet
and social media and cell phones.
Yeah.
Cell phones too. So today's new tools range from the very concrete smartphones and the internet to mass education, widely spread knowledge and abstract critical thought. Okay, these are much more immaterial and abstract when compared to the set of tools of a generation ago. So consider that a blacksmith, he had a time and a place for his tools, and they wouldn't really be helpful anywhere else except in the blacksmith's shop, right? Today, we're very different. We carry our tools, particularly our smartphones, and our education all around us. And many of us, in a negative sense, think we're experts in everything because we're experts in something. That's a negative sense of the thing. But in the same sense that the blacksmith's tools were very good in a material sense of building horseshoes and stuff like that, our tools today are like prosthesis. He uses this word to describe them. We carry them around at all times, and we use them constantly, unlike in the past. And new art will come from these forms of art in the postmodern world. So some examples of a prosthesis would be like the cell phone and all that. But the important thing is that they're integral to our being, which is unlike the past. So if everybody ever had a 9-to-5 job, those things are becoming rarer and rarer today. Part of the reason is that the new tools of the world today create different struggles and different possibilities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we find it very hard to put down our tools today and just go home.
Yeah.
We take them wherever we want. So they are, in fact, prostheses in a different way than there's ever been in the past.
Prostheses, so they're like
Yeah.
attached to us.
They're attached to us. How difficult it is it to you for you to get rid of your cell phone, right?
Yeah, very.
And how difficult is it for you to get rid of your education, right?
What do you mean, get rid of?
Well, in the sense that the blacksmith didn't need his education except in the blacksmith's shop.
Right.
It had a very localized place where it can be used. If you happen to be a psychology major or a philosophy major, you use it everywhere.
Right. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And he's saying that two of these tools, the networking. These he wrote another book with Michael Hardett, and he spoke very highly of these two new concepts: networking and exodus, which he believes are transforming the world and by extension art. Networking, yes. So in the past, you had up and down pyramids like unions and associations. Networks are much more difficult to stop in a different way. They're the tools of the modern age as opposed to getting hierarchy. So he points out that the forces that be, the status quo, developed bureaucracies to enforce their power. And the reaction to that were more bureaucracies to stop that power or to limit it and to make it better. So unions have a hierarchy and they're against the other hierarchies in a sense to try and get a better deal.
Yeah.
Laws are being put in place always in a sense to stop unions, right? So we have less union membership at all the time now because it's very hard to be a union. But a network is different. It's new. The laws aren't there. And so, or the laws, the potential for networks hasn't been exploited yet. I guess when he had written, I guess we can see it a little better now. But
yeah, I would say like networks in terms of even insurgent struggles in like Iraq or the Rojava in why can't I Kurdistan.
Yes. Yeah. And even Occupy Wall Street was pretty much a network thing. There was no real hierarchy thing. So it's clearly there. And the second one he's talking about is exodus. This is the recognition of who needs who. So those are the laboring class, the people who produce something, don't need the overseers as much as the overseers need them. That recognition gives them power. Mixed in with networking, they have the possibility to transform the world.
Well, that's class consciousness, basically right there in solidarity.
Yes, but the class consciousness are not the same classes that have ever been elucidated in the past. So again, there's no proletariat, there's no bourgeois. They're mixed now. You need something different. So there's new terms like the precariat, which might be more accurate today.
Precariat, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, but it even may be out of date too. So, but the network and the notion of exodus can be applied in new and different ways that I guess the powers that be would find harder to deal with. These tools, which are like prostheses, will be a source of new forms of art that are in the postmodern world that are beyond our imagination right now. So he has high hopes for the future.
High hopes.
Oh yeah, very high.
But those future prostheses will all have been developed by capitalists for capital.
In the same sense that unions or bureaucracies were also did that same thing, but they were
maybe unions. No,
unions took on the hierarchy, the bureaucracy. They created a bureaucracy of their own.
Yeah.
That's what he's talking about. So yes, it's always the new tools are always created by the powers that be, but they are taken over by the postmodern because they changed something new about it. They were brought into being for the purpose of augmenting the power of a particular group. But by eliminating some of the things that they hadn't thought about, some of their sensibilities, prejudices, or thought categories, they can change it and rework it in a different way. And that's where the art and the sublime experience is critical in both art and in politics.
You can make that argument about the internet, how it was developed by the government, the American military, in like the 70s or 80s, and
Mm-hmm.
then that slowly turned into universities, and then it just expanded out and became this kind of free, this thing with no laws, no rules, and it was open to everybody.
Yes, and in
Wild West.
ways that could not be imagined. So
Yes,
when I wrote
yes,
this, I had not ever heard of blockchain, but the idea of blockchain being that as long as there's a computer somewhere in the world that continues to do the processes, it'll continue, and
right.
it's sort of in a sense beyond the the scope of any particular government. Now, of course, they'll eventually they'll be able to get in control of that, and something new will come out. But it's that creativity that came out. So I would hazard a guess that he would agree that blockchain is a work of art. Somebody's liberated labor, did it for the fun of it, created Bitcoin as a proof of concept, and then it took off because there's blockchains everywhere that are not based on Bitcoin, right? And
Yes.
some people are profiting from it. Some people are just enjoying it. A whole bunch of things can be done and imagined now that weren't before from this networking.
Yeah, okay. Makes sense.
And that is the end of the book.
That is Antonio Negri. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so that took us about an hour, or a little under, because we had technical difficulties.
Sorry about
Now, going forward, we clearly won't be having meetings anytime soon. Probably not again for at least till September, I'm guessing.
that. Yeah, that's what I'm expecting.
So I'm wondering then if well, how's your schedule at city council? Is it still the same, or do you have more time or less, or the same?
It's about the same.
Okay, so you're still expecting to be
Yeah, I'll be there next Tuesday.
there. But you're working the same hours that you were before.
Oh, there's far fewer activities now. It's pretty much only reading.
Okay.
So we can do some of the other stuff that we haven't done in the past. For example, If Women Counted by Marilyn Waring.
Oh yeah. So we could reach back and do some of those. That's a great one. Okay, yeah. So maybe that we could just keep this up every bi-weekly or even weekly if you have the time, if you have nothing else to do. But yeah, we can definitely keep that up. And okay, there's one thing I wanted to make a suggestion. Give me one second. Okay, this puppy right here.
Capitalist Realism. Is there no alternative? Mark Fisher.
By Mark Fisher. It's a very thin book,
Mm-hmm.
but it is kind of dense, and this is. It's also got a sprinkle of kind of postmodernist thought in it too. It's really, really good. It's kind of a favorite, I think. It came out in 2008 or 9, and I think Zizek actually writes. Yeah, Zizek's on the back of this thing. It gets criticized actually for being academic Marxism instead of straight orthodox Marxist. So, but I love the book. Screw those guys. I think they're wrong in their critique. I think you should check that out. Maybe we could do that one too.
Okay. You'll have to send me the exact link and the author, and I will look for it.
Okay. There might even be PDFs too. But if you'd rather have the book, I will send that info to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Have a happy and corona-free day.
You as well. I guess we'll see each other again in 2 weeks.
Sounds good.
Hopefully get your video.
Yeah,
fixed.
I'm going to work on that.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.